1518, and he was given the job of classifying Amerindian cultures. And this was in order to identify slaving zones. Any people or culture that was considered Carib was allowed to be enslaved. The Caribs were classified as warlike, enemies of the Christians, and eaters of human flesh. In 1521, a governor was appointed to the Lesser Antilles with license to colonize by the Spanish, and this was largely due to reports of out-of-control cannibalism in the region. Cannibal accusations were also used to justify the Spanish conquest of Mexico. Hernan Cortez, who was a Spanish conquistador who defeated the Aztec Empire in 1521. Him and his other conquistadors made reports of Aztec human sacrifice and cannibalism, and in these reports, they described them sacrificing prisoners and slaves, removing their hearts and limbs, and then their flesh being eaten by nobles. There are even reports of human meat being sold on the streets of the capital of the Aztec Empire. Bernal Diaz del Castillo was a conquistador under Cortez, and he actually wrote a detailed account of the discovery and conquest of Mexico. In one of these reports, he says, "But I cannot avoid calling to mind the prisons of thick wooden beams which we found in the city, which were full of Indian boys being fattened so they could be sacrificed and their flesh eaten." Again, as we're looking at these reports, it's important to keep in mind that the conquest of Mexico happened after the laws of the Indies was passed. Therefore, you can make the educated guess that many of these reports were exaggerated or fabricated to justify the enslavement of the Aztecs. Meanwhile, while all these accusations were used as a tool to dehumanize Native communities, verified cannibal activity was taking place in Western Europe. Human corpse medicine is actually very well documented, and it reached its height from the 15th to the 17th century. And again, that's during the same period of time that accusations were made against Native communities. Europeans would consume human flesh, blood, and bones to cure a variety of illnesses, such as arthritis, reproductive issues, and even blemishes. Executioners would make extra money by selling body parts to apothecaries and pharmacies, and this was because the bodies that were being consumed were primarily the bodies of executed criminals. It was thought that for the medicine to have its optimum effect, the body would have had to have met a sudden and violent death. Those who were too poor to buy the more processed form of the human body would actually attend executions and purchase fresh blood to cook with. In Marrow the Physic, which was published in 1669, it included a description of how to prepare a man's skull to cure epilepsy. A man's skull that hath been dead but 1 year, bury it in the ashes behind the fire and let it burn until it be very white and easy to be broken with your finger. And put to it, and the blood of a dog dried and powdered, mingle them together, and give the sick to drink first and last. Both when he is sick and also when he is well, the quantity of half a dram at a time in white wine. Mummy, which is embalmed human remains, was one of the more popular forms of human corpse medicine. During this period, mummy shops were actually sprinkled all over Western Europe. Mummy was even still available in 1909 from a German pharmaceutical company. In Samuel Johnson's 1785 Dictionary of English, he even included a description of how to prepare mummy for consumption. What our druggists are supplied with is the flesh of any bodies the makers of the mummy can get, who fill them with common bitumen and adding aloes and some other cheap ingredients, send them to be baked in an oven till the juices are exhaled and the embalming matter has penetrated. Cannibalism is a term that is used to describe the consumption of the human body. Human corpse medicine is also a term that is used to describe the consumption of the human body. One of these terms it describes what most people would say was a peculiar tradition that took place in Europe before the discovery of modern medicine. The other was used as a justification to enslave and murder Native people. When looking at history, it's really easy to fall into this ethnocentric trap of viewing a practice as barbaric just because it did not originate in European society. Unfortunately, this hypocrisy is still prevalent today in the developed world's criticism of the developing world's practices, such as the consumption of dog meat or having multiple wives. So, whenever you're examining a practice that exists outside of your own culture, and if you want to criticize it, it's important to recognize that the practice that you might be criticizing is comparable to a practice that also probably exists within your own culture. Awesome. Any questions? Yes.
I have a question. So I know you were saying that they consume blood and maybe bones to heal different health issues. Was it specific diseases they were trying to help, or was it just general health benefits?
That's a really good question. Actually, typically the part of the body that was being consumed correlated with the disease they wanted to cure. So if someone wanted to cure a disease of the blood, they might consume, in that case, human blood. Epilepsy was also thought that consuming blood or human skull would help cure epilepsy. I don't know if that answers your question. Yes.
Hi, thank you. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
I'm especially taken by the detailed comparisons you made between the two sets of practices. When you were describing the Spanish reports of indigenous cannibalistic practices in the so-called world, you said you could make an educated guess that these were exaggerated. I wonder if you have, more details that you weren't able to include in the short presentation that lead you to your educated guess. More are there other reports that say, maybe these guys are exaggerating? Is it? I mean, the data you already gave about how there's a profit motive. We have the slaving zones.
Right.
Compelling case, but I wonder if you have other competing reports that are different or anything like that.
So, not specifically with the Aztecs, but I was looking at a case in Brazil where specifically, I don't know if you've heard of Hans Staden. He was a German explorer who was actually captured by the Tupinamba of Brazil, and he wrote a book detailing his account, and he claimed that upon his arrival, or upon when he was captured, they actually told him exactly how they were going to eat him. However, at that point in time, they never could have communicated with each other. So I did catch little things like that where there are inconsistencies. Specifically with the Aztecs, I'm not recalling anything in particular, but mostly just kind of the hidden agenda there and the cultural bias. Yeah, thank you, good question. Any other questions? Yes?
Yes. In Europe, did they ever eat the muscle tissue? Or
Oh.
the bones in the blood?
I think they ate all of it in different forms. I know they consumed human bones and flesh, so I would assume as well that they also consumed muscle tissue, but that's a good question. I didn't look as much I looked more at the comparisons between human corpse medicine and the accusations of New World cannibalism versus the different forms of, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah. Awesome. That's a good question. Anything else? Awesome. Thank you.